Welcome back to the Dershow. So, Columbia University, through its president, finally called in the police, who did a superb job. Nobody was hurt. They cleared out Hamilton Hall, and then they cleared out the areas in the middle of the campus where these young Hitler youth, calling for death to the Jews and other nice things, were encamped. And so, but they did too little, too late, and the suspicion is that a lot of the kids who were arrested will not be prosecuted. Um, they'll be given a slap on the wrist. I suspect that the people who broke into the building, that's breaking and entry. It's a serious crime. It's a felony. You can get years in jail for it. And particularly if you break into a building with intention to do further damage, that also becomes a more serious crime. But we'll see. We'll see if Bragg, the DA who is going after Donald Trump for a non-crime, will let these kids get away with committing a crime. It wouldn't surprise me. Which is why on Hannity last night, I suggested that lawyers should volunteer, and many already have, to join a group which I have called Heard a Jew, We Sue You, so that we can bring lawsuits against these thugs, these Hamas supporters. You have a right to support Hamas. You have a right to say we are Hamas. I'm not sure you have a right to be a student at Columbia University or to get a job after university if you make outrageous statements like that. But you do have a right to make those statements and not be convicted of crime. But you have no right to break into a building. You have no right to trespass. You have no right to cause damage in the building, and you certainly have no right to keep two janitors hostages for several hours before you let them out. O.J. Simpson went to jail for that exact crime. There was a gun involved there, obviously, and there was no gun involved here, but it doesn't matter under the law generally. If you by force keep somebody from leaving, that's another serious crime. So we'll see if there's any prosecution. If it's up to District Attorney Bragg, he just seems to be very clear that he goes after people he doesn't like and doesn't go after people he likes. But let's see, maybe he'll have a change of heart. Maybe he'll go after these people. But if he doesn't, I think we have to make sure that they don't get away with it. And one way of assuring that is bringing civil lawsuits, and you can under the Civil Rights Act. Under the Civil Rights Act, it is a federal crime. You can bring it in federal court. It's also a federal tort. To conspire with others to deny somebody their civil rights based on religion or race, and that's what's happened here. There is a conspiracy. There's no doubt in my mind, and the conspirators include the people who paid for these, many of them illegal demonstrations, and it's a nationwide conspiracy. These things didn't just pop up accidentally. Signs seem to be the same. The tents seem to be the same, at least in many areas. And so I suspect there are, as Mayor Adams said, outside people involved in organizing and encouraging these kinds of unlawful protests. And one thing good about a civil lawsuit is you get discovery. So we'll sue if we can find a plaintiff who was hurt. Could be Jewish or not Jewish, doesn't really matter. But if you find a plaintiff who was hurt and you find the person who hurt that person, and we can do it by facial identification, we can do it by getting the names of people who were arrested. And if we find a plaintiff and a defendant, we will file a lawsuit. And if that lawsuit survives a motion to dismiss it, which it will, then we get discovery. We find out who paid for the tent. We find out what's on the emails. We find out a great many things that we now don't really know. And so a civil lawsuit has the virtue of discovery, whereas a criminal case it's up to the prosecution. If the prosecution doesn't want to bring it, it disappears. Even if they do want to bring it, they can issue subpoenas or not as they choose. We have no control over that. Whereas if you bring a civil lawsuit, we do have control over that. And so I think a civil lawsuit is the remedy. And I've mentioned I've already gotten about 25 volunteers, lawyers, including some from big law firms, and one who used to work for Columbia, and others who just, many non-Jews, who've said, look, we can't stand what we're seeing on campuses and what they're doing to students, and closing down the universities and threatening and harassing. UCLA, it broke out into fights and the police didn't come for 3 hours. And even the governor, Governor Newsom, is upset in California about why the police didn't respond more quickly, really leaving it to the Jewish students to fend for themselves and engage in self-defense. When I was a very young lawyer, I represented the Jewish Defense League, and they would teach kids self-defense. In fact, their motto was "Every Jew at 22." I hope we never get back to that, because I would like to see the police take primary responsibility for protecting anybody, no matter what their ethnicity is, no matter what their background, no matter what their religion, no matter what their political affiliations, Zionist or non-Zionist. So we'll see. By the way, speaking of Zionist and non-Zionist, the House of Representatives today just passed overwhelmingly a statute. It hasn't been passed by the Senate yet, and maybe it won't pass. We don't know, but it's passed by the House. Congressman Lawler and Congressman Moskowitz were the main organizers of the bill. But lots of Democrats voted against it. Of course, the whole squad voted against it, but so did some Republicans. Congresswoman Green voted against it. I mean, its basic thrust is to say that the old statute, which prohibited discrimination based on race, should also apply to Jews. And that was added. And yet there are some people who voted against it. There's a definition of anti-Semitism, which was also debatable, but I think it's a decent definition. It says you can criticize Israel without being called an anti-Semite. You can be an anti-Zionist without being called an anti-Semite, but you can't compare Israel to Nazi Germany. That sounds like it goes over the line. Again, reasonable people can disagree about that, and maybe the courts would have something to say about that, but this is a time when congressmen of both parties should be prepared to vote for a statute that gives Jews the same right that blacks have against discrimination. So I hope it gets passed by Congress, and we'll see if the president signs it. The president may lose this election. President Biden may lose this election over what's going on in the Middle East. Nobody's happy with what he's been doing. I was very happy with what he did early on when he condemned October 7th in the strongest terms and talked about strong support for Israel. But then, he vacillated when he worried about Michigan voters and young voters, and he hasn't yet made a statement, just a clear, unequivocal statement condemning what's going on these campuses. And remember, you can support the First Amendment and still condemn the statement. I did that. I helped supported the Nazis who marched through Skokie. I believe they had a constitutional right to march through Skokie and demonstrate against Jews. But I condemned them in the strongest of terms. In fact, I said, I hope they get hit by a bus and killed. That's pretty strong opposition. I defended their right of free speech, but I opposed everything else that they did. And I think that people forget that college and university presidents can condemn the kind of anti-Semitism we're hearing. And let there be no mistake about it, what we're hearing, whatever you think the definition of anti-Semitism should be, I don't like the term anti-Semitism because Jews aren't really Semites. I'm not a Semite. It's anti-Judaism or anti-Jewishness or being anti-Jewish. It's the same thing, but the term is a little bit more accurate. But there's clearly anti-Jewish attitudes being expressed. I mean, one guy at Columbia who said he wants to run for Congress and was the head of the demonstrators said Zionists have no right to live. Now, he meant by Zionist Jews. He said, racists, fascists have no right to live. He didn't say anything about communists, but he said Zionists have no right to live, and I wouldn't mind if Zionists died. Jewish kids who are Zionists see that as a threat, and Columbia University appropriately suspended him and took away his right to be on campus. That's the right decision, whether you're a public university or private university. You can defend somebody's right to say things and oppose trying to criminalize it. But, as I said before, and Olive Wendell Holmes said, you have a right to say obnoxious things and be a racist, but you have no right to be a policeman. You have no right to be a Columbia student. I wouldn't want somebody sitting in my class next to me who said what he said about Zionists. And of course, the simple test is, should a university ever tolerate a student saying, I think all blacks should be lynched, I think all gays should be castrated, gay men castrated, gay women, whatever. I don't think anybody would tolerate that. I mean, would anybody want their son or daughter to be sitting next to somebody who called for their death? If I'm paying $90,000 to a university, I don't want somebody sitting next to my child at the university calling for death to the Jews, or death to blacks, or death to gays, or anything of that kind. Of course, if you support Hamas, you are calling for death to gays. It's implicit. Hamas kills gays. Hamas gets its support from Iran, which kills gays. So if you're pro-Hamas, you're in favor of killing gays. If you're pro-Hamas, you're in favor of raping Jewish women. If you're pro-Hamas, you're in favor of kidnapping and holding people hostage, and you're in favor of murdering babies. There's no way around that. You can't be in favor of some of the things Hamas does, because Hamas is quintessentially a terrorist organization. Don't believe me. Listen to the United States Congress. They passed a statute near unanimously declaring Hamas to be a designated terrorist group. And if you give any material support to Hamas, if you send a single nickel to Hamas, you're guilty of a crime. And so we know that. Now, that doesn't mean you can't say, I am Hamas. Of course, if you say I'm Hamas, the next thing is you'll do what Hamas does. And I am predicting here today, I have a pretty good record of predicting that among the kids at the Columbia campus and at the UCLA campus and at the various other campuses, among these kids are going to be some people who move from being advocates and supporters of Hamas to being complicitous with Hamas and to doing Hamas's bidding and to becoming a fifth column. That's what happened in the 60s and 70s with Kathy Budin. I knew her when she was just advocating anti-war positions, and then she became a murderer, and she became somebody who was prepared to kill American troops in Fort Dix, and she became somebody who was making anti-personnel bombs with nails that blew up and killed some of her best friends, some very wealthy trust fund kids who were weathermen. And I think the reason that we didn't anticipate what would happen with the weathermen is a lot of the kids who joined the weathermen came from fancy families. They were trust fund babies. They were well educated. They went to Wellesley and to other fine schools, and they became murderers and terrorists. They killed working class people, working class police officers, and yet they are the heroes of the movement. She got a job teaching at Columbia. She probably taught some of these students. She's now deceased, but I do speak ill of the dead when it's relevant to the living. And what happened to Kathy Budin is very relevant to the living. She wasn't the only one. There were many, many others who joined the Weather Underground and the Weathermen and became terrible people who killed innocent, good, and decent people and destroyed their lives and destroyed their families, and then were made heroes. That's the thing that disturbs me the most. Movies were made about them. A novel was written, American Pastoral, great novel, by Philip Roth. He didn't make a hero out of the Kathy Budin character. It's based on Kathy Budin, but he, understood her. And, of course, Philip Roth wrote phenomenal characters. And so no surprise that he would create a character based on Kathy Budin, who was a multi-dimensional character. As you know, I knew Kathy Budin's parents, particularly her father, very well. We taught together. We taught a course on constitutional litigation at Harvard Law School. I litigated cases with him. He was heartsick about what happened to his daughter. He didn't support what she did. He loved her. And he asked me to try to get a pardon for her. I tried. I failed. I don't think I would do it if I knew that Columbia University was going to hire her and make a hero out of her. But that's the way it happens. Could you imagine Harvard University or Columbia University hiring somebody who was convicted of murder on behalf of the Klan, of killing innocent people, innocent Black people? Of course, Columbia would never do that, no matter how rehabilitated the person became. Columbia University applied a double standard. It hired her because she was a left-wing murderer. If she was a right-wing murderer, she wouldn't get through the front door. And that's the reality. Let's face it. Let's not try to deny it. People say Kathy Budin got the job, because she did such a good job in prison. She helped, and she did. And she did. And you should commend her for that. But if she had killed a Black man and she was wearing a Ku Klux Klan robe, never would she have gotten a job. And that's a double standard that Columbia University should be ashamed of. If you're going to hire somebody who you believe has been rehabilitated, then it has to apply to right and left. I wouldn't hire either of them. I wouldn't have my child go to a school that hired a murderer. And there are people who've done that. I believe in rehabilitation, but rehabilitation means you have a right to be rehabilitated and live a quiet life, but you don't have no right to teach young people and to let them see you as a role model, because when you're a teacher, you're seen as a role model, and the idea of using her as a role model is just despicable. And so I know I got into arguments with her brother and others, a brother who I like, but no, I can't see the idea of Columbia University hiring somebody who was convicted of murdering 4 people. And so let's see what happens with these lawsuits. If any of you are lawyers out there and want to volunteer to join our team, Heard a Jew, We Sue You, or if any of you know people from Columbia University who could help identify some of the defendants. We need both plaintiffs and defendants to bring a lawsuit. Plaintiffs are the kids who were hurt. Defendants are the kids who hurt them. And they're adults. And filing a lawsuit against them would be a good thing to do. And it would bring about the deterrence that is not being brought about by these quick arrest and release phenomenon that we're seeing happening in New York. Maybe New York could do better. Maybe they will prosecute some of these people for the extreme acts of criminality that took place. But I'm not counting on that, and that's why we need the fail-safe of a lawsuit. And I hope people will join me, and that we will have such a lawsuit. Civil lawsuits can be very, very important in helping to bring about justice, and they can also be misused, obviously. But I think here, trying to sue people who hurt other people, I'm not talking about people who just were in your face or condemned Israel or condemned Jews. I'm talking about people who harassed, prevented movement, denied access, hurt people. There were people who were physically hurt, particularly at places like UCLA. And I'm hoping we'll get some lawyers from Southern California to bring lawsuits based on what happened at UCLA. But wherever it is, nobody who hurts another person in the face of these kinds of demonstrations should be allowed to get away from it scot-free. So, Heard a Jew, we sue you. Okay, let's look at. Did I mention? I may have mentioned this. 85 years old. You'll have to excuse me, but I did want to mention Elan Cohen. Maybe I mentioned it. She made a statement the other day. She was walking, and somebody put a microphone in her face, and she said, I condemn people who attack Jews, whether they're Jews who support genocide or Jews who don't support genocide. My God, do you know a Jew who supports genocide? I don't know any Jew who supports genocide. Genocide is a word that was originated by a Polish human rights lawyer, putting together two words, geno, which means kind of ethnic, racial, biological, and side, murder. And it was based on what the Nazis did to the Jews. That was genocide. So I don't know any Jews who support genocide, but she divides the Jewish community into two, those who support genocide and those who oppose genocide. She's friendly with those who oppose genocide if it's directed against Palestinians, but she's not friendly, although she defends the rights of Jews who support genocide. What a dumb, dumb statement from a dumb, dumb racist woman. But, we know her history. We know she's a racist. We know she's anti-Jewish, and we know she voted, of course, against the recent statute. That doesn't surprise me at all. Okay, so let's look at some of the letters. I call the ethnic studies departments, remember I railed against ethnic studies departments. I don't think they should exist. I call the ethnic studies departments intellectual ghettos. The universities bring in underqualified minorities, and when they meet the rigors of the university, there's the path of least resistance through ethnic studies. I'm not sure I understand exactly what they're saying, but I agree with you. I think ethnic studies departments tend to hire far less qualified professors than physics, chemistry, and other departments. And I think that these ethnic studies departments have, for the most part, become cheering squads. There are exceptions. The Black Studies department at Harvard is quite good academically and intellectually. I don't think they would hire somebody who was opposed to the general narrative that most liberal African Americans, but maybe Skip Gates, who is the head of the department, is very, very qualified academic. He would belong in any department anywhere in the world. But I suspect there are other departments around the country that do hire less qualified. I know the Middle East Studies departments hire utterly unqualified people, particularly Israelis. They hire a lot of underqualified Israelis who are talking dogs. That is, these are Israeli academics who couldn't get a job in Israel. Hebrew University is really a first-rate university. Tel Aviv University, Reichman University, Beersheba University, Bar Ilan. So these are people who can't get jobs there. So they try to get jobs in American universities, but they're not qualified. And so they become talking dogs. What is a talking dog? A talking dog is somebody really unique. What is unique about these people? They're Israeli anti-Zionists. And so even if they're not anti-Zionists, they pretend to be anti-Zionists. They put that on their resumes, and then they get hired. Oh my God, look what we have. We have a Jew from Israel who belongs to Jewish Voice for Peace and who's an anti-Zionist. Wow, that makes our department really diverse. Would never happen in a Black Studies department, but it happens in Middle East and Israel Studies department. Okay. If an American feels like they themselves have been the victim of the judicial system, I wonder if they will vote for Trump or Biden. That's an interesting point about what the impact will be on the 2024 election of the fact that many Americans now feel that Trump is being subjected to this get Trump singular prosecution and double standard. I'll be interested in seeing it. Professor, the White House is considering bringing refugees from Gaza into the United States, yet you hear little or nothing about efforts to free hostages held by Hamas. Does anyone even know how many hostages are actually still alive? No, I don't think anybody does know that. I've been in touch with the Israeli government on lots of these issues as recently as this afternoon, and I don't think we know the answer to that question. In terms of bringing refugees from Gaza, why? No Arab country will take a Palestinian. Egypt won't take them. Jordan won't take them. Syria won't take them. Iran won't take them. Why should the United States apply a different standard in taking them? And why do universities now, I think it was Northwestern, gave in to these thugs, these demonstrators, and said, all right, we'll hire a bunch of Palestinian professors. We'll give scholarships to Palestinian students. Why? What if Jews started to protest and said, oh, we want you to hire more Israeli professors, more Israeli students. They would never do it. And so I don't think you give in to protesters and bringing people into the country just to resolve conflicts that are occurring in front of or in university buildings. Those are two separate issues. You do not capitulate to the demands of thugs. Okay. Alan, with all due respect, President Trump was the most supportive president to Israel. Yes, he was. I agree with you. I think, and I worked with him on that, and I will work with any president on that. He recognized Jerusalem as the capital of Israel and opened the U.S. embassy there. I know. I was there. I was there at the ceremony. I was sitting right up in the front with my grandson, and we applaud President Trump for doing it. And that's a good reason for a lot of people to vote for him, and it's certainly a factor. It's going to influence my vote, which I have not made up my mind yet. But he was the most supportive president to Israel. He recognized the Golan Heights. We spoke about it. The president and I had to talk about the Golan Heights. He asked my advice about it. I gave him my advice about it. And he decided, yes, to recognize the Israeli sovereignty of the Golan Heights. The right decision. Why would anybody ever give a battleship back to a country to use it to fire on them? Because that's what the Golan Heights is. It's essentially a battleship. It's a high ground from which Syria was firing at innocent Israeli farmers and kibbutz members. Why aren't you representing Trump? I think I got 100 emails asking me that question. I thought I answered it. I have a policy of representing somebody once. I don't like to become the consigliere to a person or an organization. So I have limited myself to defending people once. I defended Trump once. I'm perfectly happy to give legal advice to his lawyers and to give legal advice publicly on my podcast or on television. But I don't generally represent a given individual a second time. Volume and quality. Woody Allen is the only director in the same tier as Hitchcock. I agree with you. I think Woody Allen is the greatest director of our time. I got a lot of emails from people saying, well, what about Sleeper? What about, and they all came up with Annie Hall. Why didn't you? My son, Elan, yelled at me, Annie Hall, come on, you gotta list Annie Hall. Well, I didn't laugh as much as I did for Broadway Danny Rose. So, but they're all part of a pantheon of great direction. And yet he's been canceled by American directors and American actors for a charge that was never proved. It's a disgrace. It's a disgrace. He should be judged on the merits of his film, not on the basis of an unproved charge. So I'm going to continue to go see Woody Allen movies, and I'm going to continue to have dinner with Woody Allen and Sun Yu whenever they'll have dinner with me. I love having dinner with them. They're charming and wonderful and funny. I'm going to continue to do that. I wonder how many people know that Cox Communications, remember I talked about this young man who is the grandson of my very close friend, Jim, who has been accused, again, I don't know the facts, but has been accused of providing the tents and other resources for these thugs. How many people know that Cox Communication was founded by a man with the same name who was also once the Democratic nominee for president? Yeah, 1920. He won the Democratic nomination, lost, I think, to Harding. He was, I think, maybe the governor. I don't remember my history all that well. But he then founded Cox Communication, which became one of the most successful communication companies in the world, owned numerous newspapers in the South, and had a very nice son. Cox had a nice daughter who I know. I sat next to her, in fact, at the wedding of my friend's daughter and the Cox young man. And the Cox man who married her was a very nice guy. And then his son became this radical left supporter of Hamas. I'm sorry for that. And I know my friend Jim would have been sorry for that as well. What percentage of the protesters do you think are Holocaust deniers? That's interesting. I would say a high percentage know nothing about the Holocaust. They know nothing to deny. What Holocaust? What are we talking about here? We're talking about what's going on in Gaza? No, Holocaust? 6 million Jews? Sorry, never heard of it. So they're not deniers. They're not smart enough to be deniers. They're too stupid and too poorly educated for $90,000 a year at these elite schools to know anything about the Holocaust. And the Holocaust is hardly taught at all at a major American universities. And so, no, I don't think a lot of them are Holocaust deniers. Some of them clearly are, but I don't think a lot of them know very much about the Holocaust. But you do, and my audience is very well educated, I know from the letters. So thank you, and see you next week.